honored for his medals, ignored for his skin. A black veteran's truth shocks the memorial. The morning air was crisp, the sun casting long shadows over the sprawling memorial grounds. Rows of white headstones stretched out in perfect symmetry, each marking a life that had served, sacrificed, and given to a country they loved. The crowd gathered was diverse, families holding flags, veterans in uniform, children clutching flowers. But their purpose was unified: to honor those who had worn the uniform and paid the price for freedom. Yet, among them sat David Johnson, an 85-year-old black veteran dressed in his well-maintained service uniform adorned with medals that gleamed in the light. The Silver Star, the Purple Heart, and others that told stories of valor and sacrifice. Despite the honor displayed on his chest, David sat alone, a quiet figure among the bustling crowd. People moved past him as if he were invisible, offering polite nods at best, but rarely stopping to engage. David wasn't a man who sought attention. Decades of service had taught him humility and endurance. But today, as he sat on the folding chair at the edge of the crowd, his gaze fell to the medals on his chest. They weren't just symbols of his bravery, they were proof of the battles he had fought, both on the battlefield and in a country that often saw his skin before it saw his service. And today, at a memorial meant to celebrate heroes like him, David was about to confront a truth that would shake everyone around him. If you've ever wondered what it means to fight for recognition in a world that too often overlooks you, this story is for you. Stay with us, because David's journey isn't just his, it's a reflection of the struggles faced by so many others, and it carries a powerful message of resilience and justice. By subscribing to this channel, you're joining a community dedicated to amplifying voices like David's, ensuring their stories are seen, heard, and remembered. Let's stand together as we uncover the truth and find hope in the process. David adjusted his hat as he scanned the crowd gathering for the ceremony. Parents wrangled restless children, veterans exchanged firm handshakes, and organizers bustled around, ensuring everything was in place. The air was filled with a mix of somberness and pride, and the distant sound of a brass band tuning their instruments added a sense of gravitas. For David, this wasn't his first memorial event. Over the years, he had attended many, always hoping for a sense of belonging, for the acknowledgement that his sacrifices had meant something. Yet, more often than not, he left these ceremonies with a familiar ache in his chest. The kind of ache that came not from physical wounds, though he carried those too, but from being seen yet unseen, present but unnoticed. As the seats filled, David remained on the edge of the crowd, his posture straight, his medals catching the sunlight. He had earned those medals through acts of bravery that most would find unimaginable. He'd carried wounded comrades through enemy fire, faced down threats that could have taken his life, and served his country with unwavering loyalty. But today, as always, the glances from others seemed to linger more on his age and his skin than on the decorations he wore. Nearby, a young boy pointed at David, his small hand tugging at his father's sleeve. "Daddy, look at that man's medals," he exclaimed, his voice filled with innocent admiration. But the father gently pulled the boy away, murmuring something that David couldn't hear but felt nonetheless. It wasn't hostility, it was avoidance, the kind that comes from discomfort and a lack of understanding. David sighed quietly, his gaze drifting to the podium where the ceremony would soon begin. The keynote speaker, a younger white veteran, stood confidently, shaking hands and drawing the attention of the crowd. David felt a pang of envy not because he sought the spotlight, but because he knew that man would never have to question whether his sacrifices were appreciated. As the ceremony began, David's thoughts wandered back to his days in service. He remembered the camaraderie of his fellow soldiers, the shared laughter and fears, the unspoken bonds that formed in the heat of battle. But he also remembered the moments of isolation, the times when he was treated differently because of the color of his skin, even by those who wore the same uniform. He recalled segregated barracks, racist slurs whispered behind his back, and the times his accomplishments were downplayed or outright ignored. His most vivid memory, however, was the day he earned his Silver Star. It had been a brutal mission, one that left scars on both his body and his soul. He had risked his life to save his unit, dragging wounded comrades to safety while under heavy fire. The recognition he received came with muted applause, a stark contrast to the celebration his white counterparts enjoyed for far lesser deeds. That medal, the one that now rested over his heart, was both a source of pride and a reminder of the inequities he had endured. The speaker's voice boomed over the microphone, pulling David from his thoughts. Applause erupted as the young veteran finished recounting his own experiences, the crowd hanging on his every word. David clapped politely, but the ache in his chest deepened. He wondered, not for the first time, if he would ever be seen as more than just an old man in a uniform. As the ceremony continued, David straightened his back and adjusted his medals once more. He told himself he didn't need their recognition, that the honor he carried in his heart was enough. But deep down, he couldn't help but hope that someday someone would truly see him. Not just for his service, but for the man he was, the battles he had fought, and the resilience he embodied. The keynote speaker stepped down from the podium to thunderous applause, his broad smile beaming as he exchanged handshakes with the organizers. David watched the scene unfold, the applause ringing in his ears as he tried to suppress a pang of bitterness. He told himself not to care. After all, he had never been one for grand gestures or public recognition. But it was hard to ignore the sting of being overlooked, especially when his sacrifices had been just as great, if not greater, than those being celebrated today. A young woman in the crowd stepped forward to present a floral wreath at the base of the memorial. She walked with reverence, her head bowed as the crowd quieted. David's eyes followed her movement, but his focus drifted to the names etched into the stone behind her. He recognized many of them, friends, comrades, brothers in arms who had fought alongside him. Some of those names belonged to men he had seen take their last breath. He had carried the weight of their loss for decades, their faces vivid in his mind even now. David's hand rested on the arm of his chair, his fingers curling tightly around the edge. The memories were flooding back faster than he could stop them. The sound of gunfire, the smell of smoke and blood, the weight of a wounded soldier slumped against his shoulder. He had been a young man then, fearless but not invincible, thrust into a war that demanded more than he thought he could give. And he had given it. Every ounce of his strength, every piece of his soul, because he believed in the ideals he had sworn to protect. But returning home had been a battle of its own. While his white counterparts were welcomed with parades and job offers, David was met with silence, suspicion, and, at times, outright hostility. He remembered the looks of disdain when he walked into a diner wearing his uniform, the hushed whispers that followed him down the street. He remembered being told by a landlord that he couldn't rent an apartment because of the neighbors. The medals on his chest hadn't shielded him from the reality of being a black man in America. The master of ceremonies returned to the microphone, thanking the crowd for their participation, and inviting them to take a moment of silence to honor the fallen. The crowd bowed their heads, the solemnity of the moment filling the air. David closed his eyes, his thoughts once again drifting to his comrades, both those who had survived and those who hadn't. The silence was heavy, but it was broken by a single, clear voice. "Excuse me," the voice said. It was deep, resonant, and commanding. Heads turned as David slowly stood, his posture straight, his gaze steady. He hadn't planned to speak. He hadn't even planned to draw attention to himself. But something inside him had shifted. The years of being overlooked, the weight of unspoken truths, and the memories of his fallen comrades demanded that he speak now. The crowd parted slightly, giving him room as he stepped closer to the podium. The master of ceremonies looked startled, but stepped aside, motioning for David to take the microphone. Murmurs rippled through the audience as David adjusted the mic, his medals glinting in the sunlight. "My name is David Johnson," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "I served this country for more than 20 years. I fought in wars where I saw things no man should have to see. I earned these medals not because I wanted glory, but because I believed in something bigger than myself." The murmurs subsided, the crowd now fully focused on him. David paused, his gaze sweeping over the audience. "But when I came home," he continued, his voice growing stronger, "those medals didn't protect me from the reality of being a black man in America. They didn't stop the stares, the slurs, or the doors that were slammed in my face." He took a deep breath, the weight of decades pressing against his chest. "I stand here today not just for myself, but for every black soldier who fought for a country that didn't always fight for them. For the men whose names are on that wall, who gave everything they had only to be forgotten or ignored." The crowd was silent now, the weight of his words settling over them like a blanket. David's voice softened, but his tone remained firm. "I didn't come here to disrupt this ceremony. I came to remind you of something important. The fight for freedom isn't just on the battlefield. It's here, in our communities, in our minds, and in our hearts. It's in how we treat each other, how we see each other, and how we remember those who came before us." He gestured to the names on the memorial, his hand trembling slightly. "These men, black, white, and everything in between, they fought and died for an ideal. Let's honor them by living up to it. Let's see each other not as strangers, but as brothers and sisters. Let's make sure no one, no veteran, no citizen, is left to feel invisible." The silence was broken by a smattering of applause, which quickly swelled into a standing ovation. David stepped back from the microphone, his heart pounding. He hadn't planned to bare his soul to a crowd of strangers, but as he looked out at their faces, some tearful, some thoughtful, all moved, he felt a sense of catharsis he hadn't known he needed. As the applause continued, David returned to his seat, his hands trembling slightly. People began to approach him, first one, then another, then a line of others. A young woman knelt beside his chair, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said. "I never understood, but I do now." David nodded, his voice too thick with emotion to respond. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen, not just for his medals, but for the man he was and the truths he carried. And as the crowd began to disperse, their conversations buzzing with new awareness, David felt a quiet hope stir within him. Today had been more than a ceremony. It had been a step towards something greater. The crowd around David began to shift, their earlier indifference replaced by a palpable sense of recognition. A small group of younger veterans approached him first, their expressions a mixture of respect and curiosity. One of them, a young black man in his late 20s, extended his hand. His voice was steady, but filled with emotion. "Mr. Johnson, I'm Sergeant Marcus Harris. I just want to say thank you for your service, for your courage today. Hearing you speak, it hit me harder than I expected." David shook his hand, his grip firm, despite the slight tremble in his fingers. "Thank you, son," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "It's young men like you that remind me why I did what I did, why I still believe in what this country can be." Nearby, an older white veteran approached, his posture straight, but his expression hesitant. His uniform was immaculate, his own medals gleaming in the sun, but his eyes carried a weight of something unspoken. He stopped in front of David, removing his cap as a sign of respect. "Mr. Johnson," he began, his voice gruff but earnest, "I served in Vietnam too. I saw what men like you went through over there, and what you faced when you came back. I didn't say anything then, and for that, I'm sorry. But hearing you today, it opened my eyes in a way I didn't think was possible." David studied the man for a moment, his heart heavy but his gaze steady. "It's never too late to see, and it's never too late to act," he said simply. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." The veteran nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. Around them, the energy of the gathering began to shift. People who had previously avoided looking directly at David now moved closer, forming small groups to discuss what they had just heard. The murmurs carried themes of realization, regret, and a desire to understand better. A woman in her 40s, wearing a bright scarf and holding a notebook, stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Johnson, I'm a journalist," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I've covered many memorials, but I've never heard someone speak like you did today. Would you be willing to share more about your story, about your experiences? I think people need to hear it." David hesitated. He had spent so many years keeping his thoughts and feelings to himself, unwilling to relive the pain for the sake of others' curiosity. But looking at the woman and the growing crowd around him, he realized this wasn't just about him. This was about ensuring the struggles and sacrifices of black veterans, of all black Americans, weren't forgotten or ignored. "I'll share," he said finally, his voice steady. "But not for me, for the ones who can't speak anymore, for the ones whose stories were buried with them." The journalist nodded, her face lit with a mixture of gratitude and determination. She quickly jotted down his contact information, promising to reach out soon for a formal interview. Around them, more people gathered, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and guilt. A young boy holding an American flag approached next, his wide eyes fixed on David's medals. He looked no older than 10, his small frame dwarfed by the flagpole in his hand. "Sir," he said in a quiet, tentative voice, "thank you for being so brave." David felt his chest tighten at the boy's innocence, at the sincerity in his eyes. "Thank you, young man," he said, his voice catching slightly. "It's young people like you who give me hope for the future." The boy's father stepped forward, his expression somber. "He's been learning about history in school," the man explained. "But hearing you today, Mr. Johnson, was a lesson neither of us will forget. Thank you for opening our eyes." David nodded, his heart heavy, but filled with a quiet sense of purpose. The ripple effect of his words was already beginning to take shape, spreading through the crowd like a wave. He had spent decades feeling invisible, his voice lost amid the noise of a world that often refused to listen. But now, for the first time in years, he felt like his voice mattered. As the crowd began to disperse, David noticed a group of young adults gathering near the edge of the memorial. They held signs advocating for veterans' rights and racial justice, their enthusiasm and energy palpable. One of them approached him, a young black woman wearing a shirt that read, "Justice for All." She extended her hand with a warm smile. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "your words today, they were powerful. We're organizing a campaign to bring more attention to the struggles of black veterans. We'd be honored if you'd join us." David looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mix of surprise and pride. He had spent so long feeling like his fight was a solitary one, but now he saw the potential for something greater. "I'm not sure how much help I'd be," he said humbly, "but if my story can make a difference, then I'll do whatever I can." The woman's smile widened and she nodded. "Your story already has, Mr. Johnson, and with your help, we can make sure it continues to." As David exchanged contact information with the young activists, he felt a renewed sense of purpose taking root in his heart. The pain and isolation of his past hadn't disappeared, but they were being transformed into something powerful. Something that could inspire change, build bridges, and bring people together. The day wasn't over, but it was already clear that this memorial had become more than just a ceremony. It had become a moment of reckoning, a call to action, and a testament to the enduring power of truth. And, as David stood beneath the fading sunlight, his medals gleaming on his chest, he felt a glimmer of hope for the future. A future where voices like his were not just heard, but celebrated. David's words rippled through the room like a stone dropped into a still pond, creating waves of emotion and reflection among those gathered. The community center, usually a quiet space for local meetings, was now filled with people who'd been moved to action by his powerful speech at the memorial. Faces of all ages and backgrounds surrounded him, some familiar, others strangers, but all shared a common purpose: to turn his truth into a collective movement for change. David rested his hands on the table, his weathered fingers tracing the grain of the wood as he looked around at the crowd. His medals, polished and gleaming, rested proudly on his chest, a reminder of the sacrifices he had made. Yet, it wasn't the medals that commanded the room's attention. It was the gravity of his presence, the weight of his words. "I have to be honest with you all," David began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I first spoke at the memorial, I didn't think anyone would listen. I thought my words would get lost, just like they have so many times before. But today, seeing all of you here, it proves to me that change is possible. It shows me that my voice, our voices, matter." He paused, letting his words settle in the silence. The room was so quiet, you could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. For too long, people like me have been ignored, dismissed, forgotten. Our contributions, our struggles, our sacrifices, they've been swept under the rug of history. But we're still here. And today, we're making it clear that we will no longer be silenced. A young woman in the audience, her eyes brimming with tears, raised her hand. "Mr. Johnson," she said softly, "I've heard stories about racism from my grandparents, but hearing it from you, someone who's lived it, makes it feel so much more real. What can we do to make sure stories like yours are never forgotten?" David looked at her, his gaze steady and kind. "It starts with listening," he said. "Really listening, not just to the big moments, but to the everyday experiences. Racism doesn't always come with grand gestures or loud declarations. It's in the quiet ways people are dismissed, overlooked, or made to feel small. If you want to honor those stories, don't let them end with the person who tells them. Share them, pass them on. Teach the next generation what we've endured so they can be part of building something better. The young woman nodded, her lips trembling as she fought back tears. Around her, others murmured their agreement, the atmosphere in the room growing more charged with determination. As the discussion continued, more people shared their stories. A white man in his late 60s stood up, his hands gripping the back of his chair for support. "Mr. Johnson," he began, his voice trembling, "I served in the military too. I've always been proud of my service, but I'm ashamed to admit I never thought about what my black brothers in arms went through, what you went through. Hearing you speak today, it's opened my eyes in a way I didn't expect. Thank you for your courage." David nodded, his chest tightening with emotion. "It's never too late to open your eyes," he replied. "The fact that you're here, that you're willing to listen and reflect, that's how change starts." The room erupted in applause, the sound carrying the weight of collective recognition and gratitude. A group of young activists sitting near the front exchanged glances before one of them. A young black woman with a notebook full of scribbled ideas raised her hand. "Mr. Johnson, we're organizing a campaign to address racism in veterans services. Your story is so powerful. Would you consider working with us to bring more attention to this issue?" David hesitated for a moment, the weight of the offer sinking in. He had spent so much of his life feeling invisible, unsure if his voice could ever make a difference. But now, looking at the determined faces around him, he felt a new sense of purpose. "I'd be honored," he said finally, his voice steady. "If my story can help even one person feel seen, then it's worth sharing." The group erupted into cheers, their enthusiasm contagious. Around the room, people began exchanging ideas, forming plans, and building connections. What had started as a single speech was transforming into something far greater. A movement rooted in solidarity and a shared commitment to justice. As the meeting drew to a close, David stood to address the crowd one last time. The room quieted immediately, every eye fixed on him. "I want to thank each of you for being here today," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "This isn't just about me or my story, it's about all of us, about building a community where no one feels invisible, where no voice is ignored. My medals may shine, but they pale in comparison to the light I see in this room today. Together, we can ensure that stories like mine and the stories of so many others aren't just remembered, they're acted upon." The room erupted into applause, the sound echoing with a sense of shared purpose and hope. For those of you watching this story, it doesn't end here. David's journey is a reminder of the power of speaking up, of coming together, and of standing against injustice in all its forms. Think about the people in your life, family members, neighbors, friends, who may feel invisible, their voices unheard. How can you be the one to listen, to amplify their stories, and to act? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about a moment when you stood up for someone, or a time when someone stood up for you. By sharing our experiences, we create a space of understanding, empathy, and growth. A community that refuses to let stories like David's fade into the background. And if this story moved you, consider subscribing to this channel. Together, we can amplify voices that deserve to be heard, shine a light on untold stories, and build a movement for change that honors the struggles and triumphs of those who came before us. This isn't just about one man's fight. It's about all of us standing together to create a better, more just world. Let David's story inspire you to take action in your own life. Speak up, listen, and above all, believe in the power of community to bring about real change. Together, we rise.